The interesting craze of having live lobsters in a grocery store has become a thing of the past. As a kid in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was cool and fun to go near the seafood or fresh meats aisle at Walmart just to watch the lobsters crawl around in a tank. Usually their claws or pinchers were rubber banded, but not always, which left me glued to the tank trying to figure out this otherworld creature. It wasn't just a treat for kids, but also parents, because live lobsters in Walmart were the tablet of today's time. I know my mom was happy to have a little break from me and my brother, so what better way than to walk by the lobster tanks and get your kids distracted. However, live lobsters were not just a showpiece in grocery stores. They offered customers a way to have a more bougie meal without the cost of going to a 5-star eatery. Some of the stores even offered to cook the lobsters you had to pick from the tank just to pass the time while you shopped around. This would bring in more sales for other consumer products as well as the lobsters themselves. But after the 2010s, we started to see less of the live lobster phenomenon in grocery stores. It wasn't just these beloved underwater crustaceans that would disappear, as live fish or aquariums that also offered the same distractions just without the meal prep would become a thing of the past as well. What would happen to live lobsters that we could watch for hours in grocery stores? And was it greed that would have customers on a nostalgia trip? Live lobsters have become a talking point for nostalgia of the 2000s. It wasn't every day you could go to a grocery store, pick up some pizza rolls, and get a glimpse of what was under the sea. See what I did there with that Disney reference? As a kid of that time period, I always wanted to stick my hand in the tank, but was definitely too afraid because I didn't want to end up on a scene of Final Destination. Those claws definitely left me scarred. This unique sight was introduced in supermarkets around the 1980s and 1990s, but it could date further back, as local markets of the mid-1900s also had fresh foods from its local suppliers and could even be a callback to ancient times. Throughout history, we have always had a market for foods, but during the 1960s and 1970s, grocery chains were becoming mainstream alongside the rise of Wall Street. This would lead to more infrastructure with supplying groceries that came from around the world. Cargo ships were the most cost-effective way to give consumers these beloved lobsters that would then be showcased on the floor of chains such as Walmart. The live lobsters were then used as a marketing tool, as it would show consumers that they have a more expensive taste available, giving these grocery chains more sales. Lobsters are not cheap to maintain, so what better way to get customers in the door? You would walk in, get your groceries, and then tell your friends or family you got to see lobsters alive in Walmart. This would make those people that you told that story to more curious as to what Walmart was about and why they were serving live lobsters. However, you really have to think about the live lobster offering. Did you or your parents ever buy these crustaceans around that time? And would it lead to consumer questions about the safety of the lobster as well as meal consumption? After the 2010s, the lobster craze with Walmart would start to fade. You could no longer find the tanks of the sea near the seafood aisle, leaving to some heartbroken consumers. This would also lead to the disappearance of live fish or aquariums within supermarket chains. In a 2006 NBC article, grocery chains like Whole Foods would stop the sale of live lobsters over statements such as the inhumane process of getting them on the show floor. Some of the grocery stores also performed studies noticing that there had been a lack of proper care and that customers were just not buying the lobster craze. I remember at certain times the tanks would be dingy looking at the store that would just not be appealing to consume. The study also showed how costly it was to keep lobsters alive during shipments, leading to its downfall. While Walmart wasn't the first to have a display or announce the discontinue of this beloved sea dweller, Walmart is what people remember the most when thinking of live crustaceans in grocery stores. And this was due to the fact that Walmart had become a superpower in the 1980s. Customers also had complaints about the process, as animal rights were starting to shape the industry in the 1980s and 2000s. At times you could see that lobsters were stacked on top of each other in a small tank, and even to my kid mind, it had me wondering how safe that really was for lobsters. lobsters. However, the biggest blow to live lobsters in grocery stores was that no one was buying. It was still pretty expensive to get a live lobster, and the labor involved into making a meal had deterred consumers away. Similar to the turkey market of today's time, less people are preparing turkeys for Thanksgiving because it is very time consuming. Lobsters were no different. Walmart would stop the sales of live lobsters around 2019, but realistically, they had been pushed back into the sea after the 2010s due to the cost of maintenance or loss. The arguments online differ, as some articles state it was because of animal rights, while forums and pages claim that it was corporate greed. This would lead to the end of the live lobster craze and a nostalgic trip for 2000s consumers. Even though live lobsters were a piece of the 2000s that we all needed, it really wasn't the safest for everyone or even the lobsters involved. It gave us kids of the time a way to study what we saw in books, but realistically, it was just a corporate move to bring in sales. The tank will forever be in my mind because it was cool to see creatures from the sea, and it definitely was a conversation piece for everyone. You could watch these crustaceans move around, or you could preach about the inhumane process of leaving something so valuable in a small tank. Even though these little lobsters were primarily for meal consumptions, they were actually our friends when going to Walmart, which gave a glimpse of what it means to be human. A lot of us didn't jive with the idea of keeping a sea dweller enclosed only to have it boiled, but we did want to understand how and why they got on the show floor. What do you think about live lobsters in grocery stores? Should it come back with more care into the process for customers, or should it remain as nostalgia due to the lack of corporate spending to give such care? I would love to see them in stores again because it was my childhood. However, my doubts with the proper treatments of lobsters has me wanting to leave it in the past.